to every restaurant and every food establishment in the city, and they said, pledge to give us the food that you would otherwise throw away. And with it, we'll feed between 300 and 500 people every day. So this is amazing. Sure, why not? And I served food in the restaurant. Sometimes I'd cook 200 potatoes. I'd only serve 40 potatoes. And I'd say, I've got 150 boiled potatoes sitting in butter and 2 loaves of bread. We'll come get it. And this thing worked famously for 3 months. And interest waned. And not enough people committed. Right around that same time, I was describing this scenario to a friend of mine who I'd gone to college with the first time I went to college, which was not anywhere near as successful as your time right now. And he was a political science philosophy major. He was going to save the world through diplomacy. And instead he got a job in the manager trainee program at Kroger. He's now a senior vice president at Kroger and doing very well. He's a great guy. He's my old college roommate. But he said, look, I don't think I'll be saving the world. I've got to do my rotation as the night manager at the Roanoke Kroger. I said, well, that sounds awesome. He said, well, I got a bit of a dilemma. Last night we had a lot of leftover bread and I had to do something with it. And they told me what the procedure was for getting rid of the leftover bread. I said, well, what do you mean leftover bread? He goes, well, we got about 150 loaves of white bread and about 100 loaves of wheat bread that's Kroger brand. We can't sell it anywhere. It's past the expiration date, so we put it out in the dumpster. I said, well, that seems pretty tragic. He goes, well, the thing is, you put it out in the dumpster, and as I went to go back in the back door, I noticed about 30 people coming out of the woods to obviously come get the bread. I said, oh, so sort of, vagabonds, bums, ne'er-do-wells. He said, no, families. I think they live in the woods, I'm not sure. I said, well then, pretty cool. He goes, no, it's not that cool. I told the manager, and he told me I'd forgotten to do the one important thing that you do when you put the bread out. I said, what do? You don't lock the dumpster, do you? He goes, no, we can't lock the dumpster, it's smelly. What do? He said, well, we slash the tops with box cutters and we pour bleach all over it. I said, why do you do that? He said, well, it's a big liability. If somebody eats that bread and they get sick, they could sue us. He said, I don't think starving people have lawyers. He said, yeah, well, I brought it up, and I don't know. I didn't like it, but I got to do it. I got to go through my rotation here. The next night, I happened to be driving home from my restaurant job, and I happened to be listening to. You ever heard of a guy named Larry King? Old craggy guy with suspenders who just retired from CNN. Well, he used to be a radio guy, and he had this call-in show. And he had the guy who would come to my back door, Steve, whatever his name is, on the show. And he said, Larry, I've been going around from city to city trying to make this program work. I don't know what I can do. People will do the craziest things to avoid feeding people. I said, I'm going to call this guy. And I got on. You got to call up and, I'm the caller and you got to wait. And I'm sitting there waiting to hear, 2:30 in the morning, waiting to hear. And I hear this very strange voice, good evening, Richmond, you're on the air. And like an idiot, I went, good evening, Larry. Maybe my biggest brush with fame ever. But I told the story of the Kroger corporate rule that says instead of taking food that can be distributed to people who easily need it, or just let it sit and let them come and get it, we got to destroy it. We got to slash the tops of the bread and pour bleach on it. Make the bread poisonous, so that no one will eat it. Now, I didn't really do anything. But a couple weeks later, my roommate called and he said, you know what? This guy from Tennessee is causing all kinds of troubles with the company with our bread policy. Maybe I made a tiny difference. But the kind of difference that only affects this many people until you look at the numbers around the world. Because the people who are hungry in the United States aren't really suffering from the kind of hunger that they're talking about here tonight. They're hungry. They have reduced access to meals. And even when they have no access to meals, there are social safety nets in this country that we think are inadequate, that do an adequate enough job to provide basic nutritional standards to a lot of people. The kind of hunger you're discussing this evening has no relationship to that. I'm sure you discussed the numbers, that there are between 875 million and 1.2 billion hungry people in the world. That's somewhere between 1/6 and 1/7 of the world's population, and virtually none of them in North America. Most of them in Africa, and in India, and in China, and Southeast Asia, which means the statistical numbers there, it's more like 1 in 2 or 1 in 3, completely without access to food. And when those numbers began to ring up to me, I realized two things. That there's nothing I would ever be able to do individually on my own to change that, which was very disturbing. And second, that if anything ever came along that proposed that, I would do whatever I could to say, yeah, do this, do that. That there's an opportunity. However realistic it may seem to you, consider very carefully the impact that it's proposing to make. Because there's no way I can make that kind of impact. There's no way singularly you can make that kind of an impact. But in the aggregate, any form of effort goes a long way. Why is it important? It's important for all the reasons that I'm sure Professor Newman talked about, that I'm sure many of you have heard. A world that is not completely suffering from hunger is a world that's more stable. It's a world that's more secure. It's a world that's more economically engaged and able to partake in the daily business of the planet, to buy and consume goods if that's what it takes to convince you. And it's not a world where the daily grind of 1 billion people is to fight off death from starvation. That may not be social or economic or political, but that ethical part is pretty important too. I never realized how freaked out I was when I saw those little kids when I was 7 years old, until I started seeing them on the infomercials late at night. And I realized, the problem hasn't gone away. It's just repackaged. It's just overshadowed. I can select away with 397 cable channels. I can look in the other direction. But don't. Even if you can't make the actual contribution, don't look in the other direction. Help the people who can help. Do whatever you can. But understand, one way or another, it affects everybody. That's it.